don't mind that. That's not sketchy at all.
Alright, so in this video we're going to cover building the battery packs. I have one completed right here, and I'll go through each of these components in a minute, but the idea is to create 4 of these battery packs that will work in series or in parallel for the surfboard. Let's get right into the components, then we'll start building. Alright, so let's cover each of these components. Now, I did cover the battery cells in my last video, but these are Headway 38 millimeters in diameter, 120 millimeters long. These are lithium iron phosphate battery packs. They have a capacity of 8 amp hours and a maximum discharge, a continuous discharge rate of 200 amps, which makes this battery pack extremely powerful. What's really convenient about these cells is that you can actually screw on all your bus bars and all your leads, so we'll be using these screw ends on each side. Just makes it super convenient. Now, to hold the batteries in place, I printed some custom-made basically cell holders. So the idea is that each cell will go into a slot, all 6 of them will sit in that slot, and they'll go right down. And I'm able to tighten and loosen with the little keyholes there. For the wiring, now, like I said, up to 200 amps continuous discharge. Now, I don't think I'm going to use that much amperage, at least not at continuous rate, maybe more than 100 or 150, and this will be for short periods of time. So I can get away with some of the wiring I'm going to be using here. The main terminals for the battery are going to use this 8 AWG wire. Now, this is rated at something like 30 amps continuous, but again, because we're only going to be using this for short periods of time, this is going to work just fine. It might get a little bit hot, but it's not going to ruin our application or anything like that. For the connectors to the actual terminals of the battery pack, we're using these copper lugs. These are rated for AUG 8 AUG, so just the wire I have there. I can bend them, they're pure copper. This should work very well as far as a connector. For the, electric speed control connector, we're using the XT90 connectors. Again, these are rated for 90 amps continuous. That is half of the battery's potential. But like I said, we're using it for short periods of time. I'm thinking this is going to work just fine. If I need to, I can always upgrade to something else. As far as hooking the battery packs to each other, I'm using these 1/16 inch nickel-plated copper bus bars. Now, I got these with the battery packs from Battery Hookup. These are rated for something like 130 amps continuous. It really shouldn't have an issue. They may heat up a little bit, but they're not going to burn out, at least not at the amperage these batteries can give. And quite frankly, if something is going to burn out, I'd rather have it happen out here versus inside the battery itself. So I think we're okay. A lot of people do use a battery management system to keep their battery charging and discharging correctly. What I'm really worried about is the charging phase, not so much the discharging. So what I'm going to do, instead of a battery management system or BMS, we're going to use a balanced lead with a balancing charger. So all the management type that happens with the charging phase will be done by the charger itself, and I'm going to show you how we're going to wire this. So yeah, that pretty much completes all the components. Let's get right into the build. Alright, so step 1 is going to be soldering and connecting on the balance leads to the battery pack, so let's get that going here. Alright, so first thing, let's get all the bus bars on each of the connectors to keep everything together. So as you see here, negative, positive, negative, positive, negative, positive, and so forth, and we're going to put these all in series. Alright, so nice and series. This will make up a 6-cell, 8 amp hour battery pack. So balance leads are pretty simple. You start with the red wire here. This is your main positive, so see here, positive, that's my main because it's the one that's going to take the power out. That connects to that first main positive. You just go one wire down, first negative, and then every negative after that, leading down to the main negative. Because of course this is pretty short, I'm going to be using some extension 22 gauge wire to get everything to the front of where I want it. And I want this to stick out about that far or so, so everything's going to be wired right to here. Let's do that next. and that's not going anywhere. I do want to make sure I leave a nice rim around this hole so that when I put the bolt over it, it doesn't get all lopsided. So I don't want to solder it too far into that. Just, if you're doing the same thing, keep an eye on that. That's something I made a mistake on the first one. Right onto there. Got the idea where it's going to be. Alright. So that's the first. Got 7 left to do, and let's get right to them.
And that'll be like a day for him. Would that be fun?
That'd be a day for him, is that what you said?
Yeah. Like crumble it and put it in his fuck cup.
Alright, now that we have all the leads connected, or not connected, excuse me, all them wired up, let's connect them to the cells, and then we'll test it against the balance chargers to make sure they're all hooked up correctly. Alright, so I have my balance wires all connected, and this is the balance charger I spoke of earlier. Let's plug it in, see what we get. Alright, so I'll back up here for just a second. This is the channel I'm working on, so we have a total voltage of 19.64. If I select that channel, it'll tell me all the voltages of each battery pack. I'm not sure if you can absolutely see this clearly. Try to go a little bit. So cell 1, 3.31, cell 2, 3.3, cell 3, 3.29, cell 4, 3.3, cell 5, 3.12, and cell 6, 3.3. Alright, so now that that's done, it's time to connect the main wires to the main positive and main negative. So let's do that next. Positive is going to be about there. Now, I'll be honest, I'm not sure if this is the absolute correct way to do this, but it seemed to work pretty well for me. You know, a lot of this is a little bit of trial and error. Now it's time for the XT connector. Alright, so I'm sure that was horribly wrong. I didn't pre-tin my wires because it takes so much heat. My heat gun cannot do that, so what I really try to do is just cake it on as best I can. You know, I know that's not correct, but we're just going to roll with it and see what happens. Not a great solder, I'll just put that out there. So just to point out, these caps that are made for these XT90, there's really no hope of getting that over. It is rated for 10 gauge wire, or 8 gauge wire, excuse me, but it's just no chance of that actually getting over that piece. So we're going to take some electrical tape and just insulate each end. I'm going to give a shot of this electrical gray silicone in there just to give it a little bit of separation. And I'm not trying to waterproof it at all. I'm just putting something in there so that when I squeeze on these or pull, they don't have such a hard time with all the stress. Alright, so now that my wiring is done, let's hook up the main positive, main negative, and then we'll get it into the 3D printed casing here. Alright, so this is essentially a finished battery pack. The last thing to do is just shrink wrap it, but everything works as it should. So let's go ahead and get this last piece on here. So make it look all pretty. Well, alright, we have our finished battery pack here. Now I have two of, I think, 4 to 6 that I'm going to do. Each of them, of course, is 6 cell. Each of them is capable of discharging 200 amps continuous. And I think what I'm going to end up doing is some test runs with them in series and then in parallel, and just kind of play with the voltages and amps and see what I can get out of it. But I like how these turned out. There's a bit of a ridge with where the 8 gauge with that lug comes up out of the terminal. I can't really make this any taller. My plan is to stack them in the waterproof box and have 4 as my power source. But so that's about as tall as I can get it, so it fits inside the surfboard just fine. But I did want to mention or talk about just one thing with these battery packs. So as you probably found out, I didn't use a battery management system. The reason being is that because they're only 6 cells, my charger acts as a BMS for balance charging them as they charge. When they discharge, there's no balancing going on. It's just coming straight from the battery pack. Some people say, well, if you have a speed controller and you're pulling the charge down, the voltage is coming down these battery packs, if they get below a certain voltage, you'll damage the batteries. And that's very true. But the speed controller I'm going to use, I can program to cut out at a certain voltage. Now that doesn't do anything for individual cells, but as a pack, I can make it so that it shuts off at a certain voltage. So that'll keep the pack safe, I believe. On the other note, as far as the way this is set up, now I just went and just put it all together. Each of these cells have different voltages, as we saw earlier. Because they're in 1P, the 1P6S, the 1P is important with this because I can actually start with different voltages and balance charge them because it's only taking care of one cell at a time. Each lead has its own cell to take care of. So I don't have to worry about undercharging, overcharging 2 cells that are in parallel as you might have if they weren't balanced to begin with. So if you notice they weren't balanced, it's going to be fine. This will take care of each cell individually. The last note is that with the components I used, I think these are going to hold up just fine. Even with the XT90, one way to look at this too, let's say I'm going to use 6S for my speed controller. That means each of these is 6 cell. I could use 1 or 2 or whichever. I would put them in parallel. So if the ESC is pulling, let's say, 100 amps, and pushing that, or the motor is pulling 100 amps, that means if I have these in parallel, they are going to each give 50 amps, and then of course about 22 volts or so each. But that will limit the necessity for large connectors. When I have 4 of these, which is the overall goal, now if I'm pulling 200 amps, which is kind of the max amp pullage I'm thinking is ever going to be needed for my application, each of them is still only doing 50 amps. So these connectors I think are going to work out just fine. and they weren't crazy expensive, which is nice too. But yeah, so that's the conclusion of this video. I'm going to do 2 more packs on my own, but I hope you enjoyed it. I hope you got a couple ideas of how you can kind of set up your own battery packs. One more note, if you have any questions about what components I used or my methodology before picking them out, just leave in the comments. I'll be happy to answer as much as I can. I feel like there are 1,000 building or battery build videos on YouTube, and all of them kind of cover different pieces that are really important, or at least when you're decision making on components or wires or connectors or whatnot, or even battery cells themselves. Feel free to leave a comment. I'll be happy to answer what I can. I'm still a beginner at all this anyway, so it's not like I have all the answers, but I can at least give you some of the answers to the research or some of the research I've done on the answers that I've gotten. So anyhow, again, thanks for watching, and subscribe if you like. I got a lot more coming with this build, and hope you enjoyed. Have a good day.